Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, June 16th, 2015, and oh boy, there's a lot of stuff happening today. It is a crazy day. We're going to be all over the page with all these different stories that are happening here. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick little program note. Tomorrow, Wednesday the 17th, Alex Newman, co-author of the book Crime of Educators, will be our on-air guest. Originally, we scheduled him for today, but there was a conflict came up, so we pushed him for one day. But he's going to be talking about this very wonderful book that shows how our educational system has become corrupted. And it's no longer about education, it's about indoctrination to create a generation of Americans who believe as they're told to believe, and as a side effect, unable to compete in the modern global technological workplace. So, anyway, moving on along here. A lot of stuff going on over in Kiev right now. Kiev has announced it may freeze the debt payments that it owes to other countries because they need their money to basically go on slaughtering Ukrainian people in the eastern part of the country. And this puts an end to this whole nonsense that money was being loaned to Kiev for economic reform and social uplift. It just isn't there. And as we reported yesterday, the IMF has already said they're going to go on loaning money to Kiev to fund the war, even though Kiev cannot make the payments on the money it owes already. Don't you wish you could get that deal from your credit card companies? But, obviously Poroshenko's been given his marching orders. His task is to just turn Ukraine into a bloody mess and try and create a situation under which Russia will be provoked into taking some kind of an action that the U.S. can then seize on to say, ooh, bad Russians, we all have to hate the Russians, and they've got the Cold War back up and running again. And just because my parents' generations were stupid enough to fall for that does not obligate the current generation to go down that same road of stupidity. Now, in addition to the eastern Ukraine, there's a new flashpoint developing in Ukraine, Transnistria. And you probably haven't heard about it, but you certainly are about to. It's a very thin strip of land. And it's over on the southwestern part of Ukraine. And Russia currently has military bases there. And Kiev is now saying that Russia will not be allowed access to resupply their facilities there. And that is going to step up. It's another way of poking Russia to try and get them to do something overt so that they can blame the coming war on Vladimir Putin. And the big question is going to be, if Putin were smart, he'd simply say, all right, we don't need the bases there anymore. We're going to pull our people out. Kiev will say, well, we're not even going to let you go in to get your people out. Just let them starve to death. They're just pushing every way they can to try and get this war going and make it look like it's Russia's fault. Now, as our policy escalates, we are hearing the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense, is telling the U.S. Congress nuclear weapons are on the table in the event of a confrontation with Russia. They're already talking about using nuclear weapons in this war over which brand of paper and ink currency we're all supposed to use for the next 100 years. Now, the Pentagon is in talks with the government of Poland about pre-positioning heavy artillery in that country. And this is a pattern we've seen over the last several months. The U.S. and NATO are deploying weapons of war to pre-position locations all across Europe, threatening Russia's border. It is NATO and the U.S. that are escalating the situation. Russia, of course, is looking at all these armaments being deployed on their western front and saying, we have to fortify our borders and our defenses in response to this. And, of course, the corporate media is going to say, Russia's moving up weapons and troops. They're getting ready. Well, Russia's doing what they have to do, common sense. When you're seeing all these countries put weapons on your front door, I mean, put it on a personal level. You see somebody come up into the driveway in front of your house, and they start unloading guns from their car, putting them up on your front lawn. Wouldn't you lock your front door? Grab your own shotgun? It's just common sense. But they're trying to demonize Russia and say it's all their fault. Russia's bad because they won't do what the U.S. tells them to do. It's their country. They can do whatever they want. Over in Yemen, the bombing of civilians continues under the guise of going after the Houthi rebels. And apparently Saudi Arabia has bombed another school in Yemen's capital. This is not about Houthi rebels. This is Saudi Arabia acting as a proxy for the United States government, punishing the people of Yemen for kicking out their U.S. puppet ruler. That's what this is all about. And that's why they're keeping out the humanitarian aid. They're bombing food supplies, water supplies, schools, hospitals. All of these are war crimes. They're punishing the people of Yemen for refusing to be ruled by a foreign-controlled puppet ruler. That's what this is all about here. All right, we're going to grab a phone call real quick. Andrew in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Michael. How have you been?
I'm fine. What's on your mind?
Mike?
Yes, I'm here. You're on the air.
Hello?
You're on the air. Hello? Okay, we seem to have a problem with our phone connection. I'm going to put Andrew back on hold, and hopefully he'll sort out what's going on over there. Now then, let's see. Over in Israel, as you know, they're trying to play this double game of finding some way to block the United Nations from releasing their report on the war crimes committed during last summer's operation in Gaza. The government of Israel is already flooding out their own version of what happened, trying to get ahead of it. They're angering a lot of the missions at the United Nations because Israel's documents are just outright blatant fraud, and it's almost insulting the degree to which Israel is lying to these people. And now the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs has put out another cartoon. They have a habit of doing this. They make these little cartoons saying, this is why we have to kill the Gazans, and we're good and they're bad. And if you stop and think about it, if Israel is using cartoons, it's because they think you are all children. And you won't understand what you're being told unless there's a cartoon, like Netanyahu with his little bomb cartoon at the United Nations. Netanyahu thinks you're all just tiny little children, you're innocent, you're dumb, you have to have a cartoon to understand why Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza. All right, let's see if we can grab Andrew again real quick. Andrew, are you there? Is the phone working?
Yes. How are you, Mike?
I'm fine, and you can hear me now.
What's about saying Ukraine, Poroshenko, he's trying to reconquer the eastern Ukrainian lands, but trying to pay off his debt on Washington, but that country's in ruins and basically bankrupt.
Yeah, it is, and the irony of it is even if Poroshenko were able to reconquer the eastern Ukrainian republics, he's destroyed their industrial base. He's not going to be able to use those factories to repay all this money that he owes to the IMF and these Western bankers. He really has wrecked the place. And it's as far as U.S. foreign interventions go, this has been a complete and utter disaster. And everybody is trying to use this as a crowbar to pry open the door for some kind of a conflict with Russia. Okay? All right, we got to let you go and take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And there are a lot of developments going on over in Israel and Palestine. Abbas has said to his own inner circle that the government of Palestine is going to resign within 24 hours, ostensibly because they're tired of sharing power with Hamas, and if Abbas is not in control of Gaza, then he doesn't want to play anymore. Now, a spokesman for Abbas' government is now denying that, but Abbas is playing hardball. He wants to run all of Palestine, And Israel probably is in favor of getting rid of Hamas by simply saying, well, really, Gaza should be under Palestinian Authority. But it's not going very well because now we're seeing a report, this actually came out of Middle East Monitor, that Israel has issued a threat to Palestinian Authority President Abbas, saying, you stay where you are, you stop playing these games, or our tanks will be sweeping the West Bank within 24 hours. So they're out there just rattling the sabers, rattling the tanks as hard as they can. Now, the former ambassador from Israel to Washington came out with a comment that President Barack Obama is incapable of empathizing with Israel. It's impossible for him to empathize with Israel's position. Well, Mr. Ambassador, I have a news flash for you. Obama's job is to empathize with Americans. He's the President of the United States of America, and the United States of America is or ought to be his number one priority. And I am sick and tired of all these politicians who bow to Tel Aviv and Israel's attitude that all American politicians should bow to Tel Aviv. It is very obvious at this point that while the U.S. has puppet rulers in all these countries around the world, the U.S. government itself is a puppet ruler on behalf of Israel. And it just ticks me off. No end. Israel's whining is really getting over the top. They're trying to reclaim their victim status as hard as they can. And they've kicked up a big stink over at the Louvre Museum in Paris, screaming that Israeli students were discriminated against and not allowed inside. They're anti-Semitic. Oh, France is anti-Semitic, blah, 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 blah. Now, the way the Louvre operates, they receive reservation requests double what they can actually handle every single day. And the reservation system is on a computer. And it simply takes first come, first served. Those who apply early get the reservations. Those who don't are out of luck. And the Israelis showed up late and they didn't get in. That's all that happened. But Israel's attitude toward France is, you will apologize, you will pay us money, you will beg for our forgiveness, then you'll pay us some more money. Because that's the way they operate. It's amazing here. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a quick phone call from Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk about Jade Helm.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about the various things that it could accomplish. Right now, we're already seeing silly things coming out of alternative media, saying they're preparing for an asteroid, there's tunnels going to Walmart. You know, they're muddying the waters, so they say.
Yeah, they are.
And another one, they're also conditioning the people while they're performing the Jade Helm when they go through the town with the helicopters and the sirens.
Well, that part of
people,
that agenda is failing because people are not being conditioned to accept it. They're seriously annoyed by all of this stuff. I think, if anything, it's building up the level of hostility and resentment in the American people.
But I think that's what they are trying to achieve anyway. And I heard another thing, too, about this. I think it was a Green Beret who was talking on alternative media. And it says, they spent millions of dollars on urban towns, just simulated towns where they can actually practice procedures like this, where they go through the towns and they practice combat situations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why wouldn't they just do that instead of going through actual towns in itself?
Well, it has to do with it has to do with the training doctrine, and for the last couple of decades, the U.S. military has been training for counterinsurgency operations, which are confined to very small areas, such as a town or a simulated town. But 2 weeks ago, one of the guys with all the brass over at the Pentagon was saying the problem was that our military has not been trained for large-scale frontal war against a military peer. And they can't build an entire simulated country. And I think part of Jade Helm is an attempt to very quickly retrain America's military forces on how to cross large stretches of ground and not get lost in the process, which is essential to maintaining a line against a military peer. And I think that's a big part of it. And yes, Department of Homeland Security is involved to train how to deal with a civilian uprising, because the government is finally realizing that they have pushed the American people to the breaking point, that the American people don't believe what they're told to believe anymore, that we all know the government has gone completely off the constitutional reservation. And so they're getting ready to basically declare war against the American people in the 50 states. Our best strategy right now is to not give them an excuse to go on out and do that, which is why we see the government trying to manufacture that excuse themselves with agent provocateurs, all of this race baiting that's going on, Ferguson, Adam Kokesh's armed march into Washington. They're trying to create something that will spark a small, controllable mass uprising that they can brutally crush as an object lesson to the rest of us slaves, and then declare national emergency, martial law, shred what's left of the Constitution, and we'll be off into the fascist states of America for real. Anyway, getting on back over to Egypt, as you probably heard on the SRN news break, their court has confirmed the death sentence for ousted President Morsi, and we're seeing basically the final wrap-up of the counter-coup, where the Egyptian people got sick of their U.S. puppet ruler, Mubarak. They kicked him out of power, took their country back, put in their own President Morsi. The U.S. went back in there, kicked up another counter-revolution to get Morsi out, and put al-Sisi, another U.S. puppet, in. That's what all these wars are all about. U.S. puppet rule over these other countries. And more countries are trying to take themselves back, and that's why the U.S. is having to go back into Egypt for the second time, back into Libya for the second time, Yemen for the second time, Iraq for the third time. These pesky conquered provinces refuse to stay conquered. What's wrong with these people? Don't they understand the rules we made up? We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm talking about the economy now. Russia is embracing the yuan more and more in a move which obviously is not favorable to U.S. dollar hegemony. As you know, Russia and China are now dealing directly in each other's currencies for major parts of their commerce, such as energy. And again, little bit of history, all the way back at the end of World War II, when most financial transactions were still being settled by physically trading bullion coins or paper notes. It did make some sense to have a single global currency everybody could rely on. But in this day and age of instantaneous global financial confirmed transactions, it's not necessary. Anybody can do business in whatever currency both parties are willing to accept. And this idea that the world has to go on being subservient to this one currency coming from the United States, it's absurd. It's an obsolete idea. And the other aspect of it, of course, is those nations still tied to the dollar are still subservient to U.S. pressure. Because the U.S. can go out and say, you will support us in our war against whoever they're invading this week, or we'll just change the financial rules, and that will be harmful to you. So that dollar hegemony is not just about profits, it's about control. Now, Ukraine, even as they talk about freezing all their debt payments, is officially recognizing that, yes, it does owe Russia $3 billion for oil and gas, and they feel really bad about it, that they can't make payments on it. Putin is out there saying that all this money being poured into Kiev to a government that can't make the payments on the money it already owes, basically it amounts to a bribe, and he's right. Poroshenko is being bribed to kick up some kind of a confrontation with Russia. Meanwhile, China is dumping record amounts of U.S. treasuries. They dumped $120 billion, with a B, over the last 2 months. They're funneling them through Belgium. And they're trying to basically not let the word get out. Treasuries are being dumped because they don't want to trigger a panic, because then the treasuries they're still holding lose value. The question I can't figure out is, who's buying these treasuries? It could easily be the Federal Reserve just printing up and creating new money and say, yeah, we'll buy the treasuries, we'll buy the treasuries. At which point the Federal Reserve will own the federal government. All right. Now then, Italy's finances out of control. Public debt has hit 2.19 trillion euros. And up in Canada, they are going through the same thing we are here in the United States. Consumer spending is way, way down. And what their analysts are saying is that all this negative news, the government spying, the pushing for war, has basically crushed consumer sentiment. People aren't feeling confident that there's going to be a peaceful, prosperous future to let them go on out and buy things that they'd like to buy. And that's probably also a factor here. Now, we're about 2 weeks away from the end of the second quarter, and setting aside the fact that the numbers are already being cooked, the consumer spending numbers are not going to be very good at all, and they're not going to have the cold winter to blame it on. They've run out of scapegoats and excuses. Our economy is shutting down because all of the wealth is concentrated at the top, and there isn't enough left in circulation in the rest of the country to run the country. Gap is shutting down 175 of their stores. That includes Old Navy, Banana Republic. All those people are going to be out of work. Crate and Barrel is going to close their New York City flagship store. We're probably going to start seeing that here in Hawaii. It's one of the odd things about when you go down in Waikiki, you're going to see all these ultra-high branded stores, Chanel and Versace and all the rest of that. They're not actually selling much of anything to the tourists there. They just want to be able to say on their letterhead, we have stores in Paris, Rome, and Waikiki. But that's a very expensive luxury. It's a very expensive form of vanity. And we're starting to see some of those flagship stores in Waikiki shut down. PetSmart is going to lay off 15% of their workforce. The economy is locking up. Yesterday I was saying about how right now our entire Wall Street system is surviving only because it engages in fraud. And so there was this very interesting story which tells you all that you really need to know about these money junkies. There was a stockbroker, John Wesolek, who is in serious trouble because he had a client who came down with Alzheimer's, 81-year-old, and he managed to get her estate, $1.8 million, transferred under his control, even though she wanted it to go to charity. And he broke all kinds of regulations, and they did catch up with him. But that's what goes on. That's the norm. Bankers and financial people are crooks. They can't make an honest dollar anymore in this economy, just like you can't. They just have the access and the means to make a dishonest dollar. We make money the old-fashioned way. We screw it out of other people. Which gets us onto these trade agreements. Now, today was supposed to be the deadline for whether or not the House was going to pass the Trade Assistance Act. Now, over in the Senate, the Fast Track Authority was a single bill. Over in the House, it was broken into two separate bills, TPA and TAA. TPA passed last week. TAA did not. TPA without the TAA is a dead issue. And the deadline for getting a re-vote under the rules Congress operates on was today. They couldn't get the votes to pass it. What they did do was vote to change the rules. And the new deadline to arm twist enough votes to get TAA through the House is extended to July 30th, 6 weeks. This is what makes it very hard to understand or predict what the government and economy are going to do, because every time they can't get what they want under the present rules, they just change the rules. So they basically gave up trying to get TAA through the House and just gave themselves a new deadline. They now have 6 weeks for the NSA to go out to some of those Democratic no votes and find something that they can blackmail them with. Now, further complicating these trade agreements, it turns out there is a section in the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership Treaty that has been leaked out. Remember, this is all supposed to be secret. You're not supposed to know what's in there. But a lot of it is coming out. And there is a section in there that bars all the signatory nations from any kind of commercial boycott against Israel and Israeli goods. And that right there confirms what I've been telling you. The U.S. government is a puppet ruler on behalf of Israel, and we are all Palestinians now. That's why the civil police force is treating us the way the IDF treats the people of Gaza. Now, former French President Sarkozy is out there with various meetings and says boycotting Israel is unacceptable, from which I would deduce that Sarkozy is going to try and run for president of France again, and he needs to kiss up to Israel. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and you've been following the IRS scandal, I'm sure, the way I have. There is a showdown coming, a very poorly timed one. Apparently, the IRS came out and said, oh my goodness, we actually found some additional emails. A couple of thousand of Lois Lerner's email, and Judge Sullivan said, okay, can you explain why you didn't find them before, and when do we get them? And the IRS is hemming and hawing, and they are refusing to turn over this latest batch of emails, saying that their lawyers have to go through them and check them for duplicates, something the Treasury Department has already supposedly done and could be done in electronic form very quickly. But it's a big stall, and Judge Sullivan appears to have reached his breaking point, and they're talking about criminal charges against some of these people in the Internal Revenue Service. And one of the more bizarre excuses for not turning over the emails, and remember, this all goes back to the fact that the IRS supposedly was sending over private taxpayer information to the White House to be used to target and harass opponents of the Obama administration. Obama has an enemies list just like Richard Nixon. And these emails are supposedly detailing exactly who authorized that. And one of the excuses the IRS has for refusing to send the emails to the court is they contain confidential private taxpayer information. So this is just major obstruction of justice. And the judge looks like he is going to start seriously going after some of these people. And if it does, this will drag into the middle of next year's election season, and it will be very bad for Obama and not so good for Hillary by extension, because this is all going to drag up all that nonsense about missing emails from Benghazi and her private email server. We're going to take a phone call here. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Mike, I called you yesterday about,
yes, you did.
Calling other talk shows and, giving, blowing information in the beginning because, otherwise they won't, call screeners won't let the call go through and all that. I don't know if I drive for a living, so I get to listen to a lot of different shows, either that or music, something to keep me awake,
Mm-hmm.
But I listen, every once in a while I'll turn on Glenn Beck as long as I can stomach it, right?
Okay.
And this clown is actually talking about some guy in Russia by the name of Dugin, who I never even heard of, who's pulling the strings, and he's actually dominating the right wing all over Europe, the neo-Nazis and the fascists, and also even dominating the left wing, and he's mixing it up with the Greek Orthodox Church, and how evil Putin is. Now, the fact of the matter is the only right wing and the neo-Nazis are in the Ukraine, are in the Ukrainian government and related to the Ukrainian government. This guy is out and out lying. Now, it's very hard to get through to the guy because he doesn't take many calls, and he's very, very tough call screener, and I think they recognize I had made a really nasty call to him one time. I didn't curse him out, but something that he didn't like. and he's a very egomaniac. I think the guy's actually crazy. I think he's sick in the head. Okay, and so it's very hard to get through. So what I did when I got home, I went on Facebook. I went on his Facebook site, and I started explaining to people that this guy's a huckster, he's a shyster, that he's also crazy, that he's probably still on the sauce, that he's got, and that he's making up stories now, and he's probably influenced too by what I think is a CIA handler, this guy Buck Sex, who admits he worked for the CIA before, and I think he's still working for the CIA. This guy, they know they got a real loon on their hands, but he's also the kind of loon that's kind of like Jim Jones. In other words, he's got a lot of
He's got the charisma. He's got the charisma. All right. Well, Mark, a couple of things. First of all, I think Glenn, the situation in Ukraine and Russia and everything is very confusing, and I think the propaganda agenda is to make it so confusing that people just throw their hands up in despair and say, all right, well, just tell us what we're supposed to be thinking about this whole mess. That, of course, is not working. If you're going to go after a Glenn Beck, it's best to steer clear of the personal attacks like he's still drinking and so forth and so on, unless you have a hard fact to go with it, like he's been pulled over for a DUI. What you need to do is simply find something that he has said that is provably wrong and just nail that. And once you do that, you've got a crack in his credibility that you can use to exploit further. For us in the Truth Movement, anytime somebody says the government says this, the government says that, the first thing we reply is that the same government that told us Saddam had nuclear weapons? Or that the unemployment rate is only 6%, or humans are warming the earth, because those are government lies that everybody knows and understands were, in fact, government lies. And once you lay that foundation, people are going to be listening to what you have to say, because ultimately we're all suckers for the truth, and we're going to go where the truth is. Listen to the people.
Yep. But you know what else he's saying on his show? He said that he thinks Russians pushed by Putin are actually the ones criticizing him on his Facebook and his, on his, website and all that. That's the sign of a crazy man. Really, why, you think actually they would be interested in what this clown is saying? And by the way, I have figured out what's going on very simply by following, RT. They send their reporters into the Ukraine and other places, and you see it, they got American reporters also. They give you both sides. And you can pretty much put it together what's really going on in Ukraine, and it's not a very pretty when you figure that the CIA, the State Department, and NGOs were involved in overthrowing that legitimate Ukrainian government and putting in this fascist. There's really not much to it. And when you watch Putin, you watch him in some of his interviews and stuff like that, I get the feeling that this is really a decent man. This is not what they're trying to make him out to be.
Yeah, that's my sense of him too. The U.S. government is facing a major problem over and above the independent media out here on the Internet. The fact is that the Internet gives everybody access to all the media all over the globe, which gives them a diversity of opinion. The U.S. has actually tried to come up with some kind of a legal justification to block Russia Today inside the United States. I know Great Britain was looking at doing the same thing. They're trying to figure out some way to make us all dependent on their official story of anything. And let's be very honest, if they shut the Internet gates tomorrow so that all we had was ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox to look at, we're still not going to believe what those networks are saying because we've been lied to way too many times. The damage is done.
I've also called Dish Network and told them, if you remove RT, I get rid of Dish, plain and simple. It's the only thing right now I'm keeping Dish for. I do get the Blaze with that on that same package, but I'm not interested in the Blaze except something I want to see for my own information, the falsity that this guy perpetrates. But RT, I told him, you take RT off. I said, I just want you to know I'm either going to go back to direct or I'm going to go to my cable network here. But it's the only thing keeping me, and I'm paying a few more dollars a month than I would have to pay if I got a package with the cable company, which is Charter. I tell them, plain and simple, you keep RT or I'm going to drop Dish. Period.
Well, I'm in agreement with you. Unfortunately, where I live currently, the homeowners association does not allow satellite antennas on the outside of the building because it clashes with the paint scheme and the landscaping. They want us all to look very cool in Hawaii out here. But I have had satellite TV before when we were hiding out in the Cascade Mountains. I absolutely love it. When Claire and I finally succeed in moving back to the mainland, yeah, we're going to have DishNet or Direct, maybe even a K-band dish. One of our listeners very generously gave me a very nice high-end K-band receiver, which I have in storage, packed away with all the silica gel, and hopefully I'll be able to fire that thing up and just get the news from around the world here.
I'm surprised. I thought Islanders were more open-minded, you know?
Yep.
I guess not, though. All right. I just thought I would tell you, and, folks, you gotta do that. Hit those, mainstream talk shows. They're putting out they're just about as bad, if not as bad, as the mainstream media. The Limbaughs, the Becks, the Hannitys.
And it's working. Limbaugh's losing a lot of his major foundation stations. His audience is shrinking. All these people's audience are shrinking. My audience is growing. All right, well, listen.
Limbaugh's not even covering, Limbaugh's not even covering the TPP. Every once in a while, switch over just to see what he's talking about. He's talking about
okay, Mark,
some woman that's
Mark, sorry, I got to cut you off. We got to take a break for our top of the hour news segment, and we'll be right back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Getting into the world of politics, we just put up a story, basically, it's a foregone conclusion. Goldman Sachs has invested very heavily in both Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush for next year's election. And this is how the ultra-rich bypass the election. They simply give to both candidates. So whoever wins owes them a favor. Now, when the United States was started, we didn't have just two parties. We had a plurality, lots of parties coming and going all the time. And I sometimes think the transition to the two-party system was done just to save the corporations bribe money. Instead of having to donate to 10 or 15 different candidates, they only have to donate to 2. It's a money-saving thing is really what it comes on down to. Now, both Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush are out there with their speeches, launching their campaign, saying that ties between the U.S. and Israel will improve in their presidencies. We're not doing enough for Israel. We are not bowing deep enough for Israel. And under my presidency, we're absolutely going to do that. Pretty much all the candidates are saying the same. Pretty much all the candidates are saying we got to have more war. It's not like we really seem to have much choice anymore, is there? The economy is about to fall apart. They need a war to distract everybody from it. Now, Hillary's campaign is in trouble, and she's trying to get past that with the relaunch, where they're going to sort of like say, everything that's happened up to now, just forget about that. We're relaunching our campaign. It's the new Hillary 2016 campaign. There is apparently a big controversy over the fact that Hillary does not want to release her health records. There have been persistent rumors that she took a rather nasty crack to the skull, which may have left some damage. And traditionally, presidential candidates do release their health records to reassure the voters that they're not going to drop dead the first month they're there in the Oval Office. Apparently, Hillary's relations with the corporate media are not doing any better. She's kicked out 2 designated pool reporters in the same day. And she's waffling back and forth on the trade bills. And the reality is, this idea that we're going to go into next year with Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush ticket, the Oval Office is not a hereditary title to be passed back and forth between 2 dynastic ruling families. We need some fresh blood in there. And it may not be that far out of the possibility, because I just saw a report that in one of the polls in the GOP states, Bernie Sanders is only 10 points behind Hillary. And considering her visibility versus Bernie Sanders, that's That's close. That's very close. We've been hearing that Bernie Sanders is getting the kind of grassroots support we saw attracted to Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. And I hope Bernie has his Kevlar on, because there have been a lot of strange deaths surrounding both the Bush and the Clinton families during their rise to political power. Interesting little article over at Liberty Fight reminding everybody that Jeb Bush may be taking the position that he's pro-life right now, but his record as governor says something else entirely. So for those of you for whom abortion is a key issue of the next campaign, you got to take a closer look at the candidates. And by the way, you shouldn't just make your decision based on the political speeches and the commercials and the banners. You've got to get on the net, dig into these people's background, all of them. Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush, all of them. Find out for yourself. Because obviously, candidates lie to get elected. They think it's actually protected free speech under the First Amendment here. Now, Donald Trump threw his hat into the ring today, came out with this rambling speech bashing Mexico, bashing the immigration program, saying that he doesn't want donors, he's going to spend his own money. He's got $9 billion. He can mount his own campaign for presidency. And he says he likes China. He's opposed to this idea of stink face with China. Wants to build a giant wall across the entire border between the U.S. and Mexico. Wants to get the Mexican government to pay for it. And joking about President Obama's out playing golf, could be on one of Trump's golf courses. And I think we have our Sarah Palin for this coming election. It's hard to take the man seriously. I think he just wants to say he ran for president, doesn't really want the job. Of course, Trump may be stepping into the race to make Hillary look good by comparison. The Democrats are going to say, oh, we got Hillary here. Well, could be worse, could be Trump. And in fact, Trump may be stepping in to take supporters and votes away from Bernie Sanders, because I know Hillary's campaign is going to be worried about him. Now, new developments in the Rachel Dolezal case. This is the woman who was born white, came from a white family, started pretending she was black years ago, and was in charge of an NAACP office. Came out that she isn't really black. She's now had to step down. And the story gets even more and more interesting. She's out there trying to defend her actions, her deception of pretending to be black for years by saying, I identify as black. Therefore, it was okay for me to have the spray-on tan and the hair and everything and live a black life because I identify as being black here. Now, I identify with being young, handsome, and rich. I think you can see where this logic actually starts to break down. And it turns out, rather interestingly enough, back when this lady was still white, and she went by the name Rachel Moore, she sued the university she was working at for white discrimination. And she sued them. She claimed that the Howard University denied her teaching posts and a scholarship because she was white. So maybe that's when she decided she was going to be black, because she get the special preferential treatments and whatnot here. Interesting kind of a story coming over from the Miami Herald, and it has to do with a bill that was passed by popular referendum. It's a ballot measure, Amendment 1. And it called for $700 million in funding for conservation and preservation. And once the politicians got that money allocated, they started doing what politicians did. They're only earmarking $17.5 million for the acquisition of park and wildlife habitat, and the rest of the money is just being carved up for other projects, including millions for an agricultural corporation to come on in and set up some kind of a facility. So even when you have a ballot initiative saying the government will do this, the government will say, well, we're going to take the money and do something else with it. It's like all these states that had lotteries saying, we're going to put the money into education. And they'd take the proceeds from the lottery, put it into education. Then they'd cut tax money for education, so education didn't actually get anything more, and they'd go off and spend the money someplace else. Now, there's a very interesting story over at the Telegraph, basically acknowledging that perhaps all the conspiracy theorists have been right all along. And they're saying, you have to, exclude the fake Apollo landings and all the rest of that stuff. But we have been right more often than not about things like Saddam's nuclear weapons. And my postscript to that is that you need to remember there's an old propaganda trick called poisoning the well. When the government sees people talking about something that they don't want them to talk about, they will intentionally plant nonsense like fake Apollo landings, no plane at the Pentagon, to try and make it look so kooky that other people will be discouraged from stepping in to find out what's going on. So even the Telegraph is now starting to acknowledge that the independent media, we have been more right than wrong. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, we have been commenting on the fact that we have caught the U.S. government flat out lying to us about various economic indicators. The U.S. government still insists the unemployment rate is only 6% in a country where 40% of the adults are unable to find a job. It's blatant. It's out there. And so I'm looking at this article that was just put up by one of our members here from Investment Watch blog, talking about how the Bureau of Labor Statistics is out there with the job numbers showing thousands of new jobs being created by small businesses every month. Well, there's a bit of a problem with that number because more small businesses have been closing than starting since 2008. The number of small businesses is in major decline. So how can they be creating thousands of new jobs? And it turns out, like so many other numbers we get from the government, they're not actually going out and counting anything. They're following statistical models. And it turns out the model that the Bureau of Labor Statistics is using to claim that small businesses are creating thousands of new jobs every month is a model dating back to 1977. And it absolutely is not reflective of everything that's happened since 2008. In other words, it's another big lie to convince you that everything is hunky-dory, and if you're hungry and you don't have a job and you don't have money and you can't pay your bills, it's really your own fault. Don't blame the Wall Street money junkies or the corrupt politicians. Really, our numbers are saying everything is just really great here. If you're looking for somebody to blame, just blame yourself. Don't you dare blame the government. Don't you dare blame the bankers. That would be déclassé. Now, we had a caller into the show yesterday talking about this story that appeared in the Sunday Times about how China and Russia had cracked the encryption on Edward Snowden's files, revealing the name of assets in those countries. And it was a big stink that Snowden had endangered our intelligence operatives, and they were going to have to be pulled out of the country and all this other stuff going on here. And when the caller called in yesterday, I was scratching my head. I said on the air, I'm having problems with this story because I know it is possible to write encryption that NSA and these other government cryptographic groups cannot break, because I've done it. And I'm just an amateur compared to somebody like Snowden, who really knows what he is doing. And as it turns out, I was right to be skeptical. Glenn Greenwald has come out with a rebuttal to the Sunday Times report saying that those encrypted files were destroyed before Snowden even went to Russia. Russia and China never had the files, let alone able to decrypt them. And one of the authors of that Sunday Times story was interviewed on CNN saying that he was simply writing what the government told him to write in that article. Basically admitting he's not being a reporter, he's just a stenographer for government propaganda. And by the way, the other day, somebody came out trying to defend Brian Williams for his lies and deceptions and saying, well, he's not really a reporter, he's just a performer. He performs on the news, and you shouldn't hold him to the high standards of a journalist and reporter and demand that he tells the truth. That's not his job. His job is to look good and be convincing and feed out the lies. the Sunday Times has responded to Greenwald's story by hitting him with a copyright claim because in his article, Greenwald included an image that showed the front page of the Times website. And the Times is clearly throwing a tantrum here. They're basically out there trying to find some way that they can go after Greenwald for outing them as having put out this blatant piece of Snowden-bashing propaganda, saying that merely showing their website in his article was a violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. He's copying the look and feel of our page. Well, this comes under fair use. He's commenting on the Sunday Times misreporting. It is legitimate to show the Sunday Times as part of that. This is never going to result in a conviction. What it is going to result in is, of course, Glenn Greenwald's going to have to pay for lawyers to go through this whole court process. And a lot of times these large corporations will start lawsuits they know they cannot win simply to bankrupt their target. And I think that's what the Sunday Times is getting ready to do here. Now remember, earlier this year, security experts came out and said this hacking group, the Equation Group, the world's most evil cybercriminals, were actually the NSA. It was a compelling body of evidence. And it should remind us the biggest cybercriminal in the world is the U.S. government. Now, over the last few days, we've been seeing this propaganda in support of the cybersecurity bill about this massive break-in to a federal government employee database that goes back 30 years. They're now acknowledging the break-in actually happened last year. It's just useful to bring it up now to scare everybody into saying, oh, we need more draconian government control over the Internet. But there is an element of this story we need to keep in mind. This database kept information on people long dead, long out of government service. The database went back 30 years. And it raises the possibility that any of your personal information that is in those Obamacare computers will be there forever. There's no way to go in and say, I want you to erase, this little sexually transmitted disease I had because it's showing up on my future, employment searches. They're going to keep it forever. Now, of course, the upside is maybe nobody will ever find that information, given how bad those Obamacare computers are running. But it really is out of control. The government is keeping every piece of information they can find about you, even if it is completely irrelevant to any governmental purpose. Now, following on with Donald Trump's attack on the immigration policies of Obama, and on that one issue I do agree with him. It is completely out of control. Apparently, there's a video that came out of Calais in France showing some of these migrants they're dealing with there trying to break into delivery trucks heading for Great Britain, and just underscoring that France's generous welfare system is acting as a beacon for illegal aliens, just like ours here in the U.S. Illegal immigrants are getting a better deal from the U.S. government than legal citizens who were born here. Now, here in the United States, there are now 121 murders attributed to dangerous criminal illegals that were brought into this country and then released by the Obama administration. So on this one issue, I'm actually in accord with Donald Trump. It has to be stopped. And Texas just went ahead and did it. They just passed the toughest border security bill of any state in America. And I'm sure just like happened with Arizona, Obama's going to come on in and say, you can't do that. We order you to leave your borders open. We need more of those illegals coming in here and bringing in all those diseases like scabies and tuberculosis and all that other stuff here. So there's going to be a constitutional crisis from this one. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And going back through some of the things that Donald Trump was saying during his announcement of his campaign for 2016, is that he thinks Oprah Winfrey would be a great vice president. He wants her as his running mate because he'll get the women vote and the black vote. And, anyway, it's amazing. I'm running a joke campaign for president next year, and I've already got more credibility than Donald Trump. Now, CIA Director John Brennan was over at Fordham University basically talking to some of the people there about the torture scandal. And his old alma mater basically denounced him for this whole situation, this whole torture. And Brennan's trying to figure out some way that he can live it down, but even with all the propaganda and conditioning and controls they're trying to bring to the universities to ensure conformance with policy, the young people are standing up and saying, no, this is wrong. Now, interestingly enough, today the United States Senate overwhelmingly voted a new law to ban the United States from ever again subjecting prisoners to waterboarding, rectal feeding, and other brutal interrogation practices, condemned as torture. It was a 78 to 21 vote. I'd sure like to know who those 21 no votes were. And it certainly looks good going into an election season. The problem is there are already laws. There are even places in the Bill of Rights that you cannot use torture. The U.S. has agreed not to use torture in various international treaties. And the U.S. did it anyway. So this exercise by the Senate is all about looking good and trying to reassure the American people that we're going to go back to the high moral road, but they aren't really. The next time somebody can come up with a justification for using torture, they'll go ahead and do it because they were doing it all along, even though it's already illegal, unconstitutional, violation of international law and international treaty. Now, down in Miami, a while back, they were filming a segment for this reality show called The First 48. It's another one of these cop shows about how great the police are. And the idea behind the show is that most crimes have to be solved within the first 48 hours or you're not going to solve them. And so they follow these people around who solve all these crimes within 48 hours. And apparently the Miami police were trying to impress the First 48 crew, and they arrested a man on TV, went out over the air, turned out completely innocent guy. And he sued, and the Miami Police Department are having to pay this guy $850,000 for arresting him on TV. So they look good for the First 48. Good for him. I hope he does something useful and positive with that money. Now, here is a story about just how messed up the system is. And this has to do with a gentleman named Carlos Montero, who's been in pretrial detention on a murder charge for 7 years. For a murder the court system knows he himself did not commit. He was arrested as part of a group of 3. One of the other defendants is known to have actually committed the murder, but the prosecutor said we're going to try them all together. And they're not able to get this case to trial on the basis of the guy who actually did the killing. And this 24-year-old kid, Carlos Montero, is out there saying, can't you just break the case apart and try us separately, because in my case it would be open and shut. I didn't commit the murder. You know I didn't commit the murder. The witnesses say I didn't commit the murder. I could go home. And the judge is refusing to do so. The judge is refusing to separate the case. This guy has been in prison for 7 years for a murder he didn't commit. Hasn't even had his day in court. Now, there's been another incident out in California where a highway patrolman was basically caught assaulting a 78-year-old man. And he's been charged with a false arrest case by the victim. And the highway patrolman is defending himself, saying that he was simply responding to pressure by police superiors to hit a monthly quota of enforcement contacts. They are on a quota system. You will write this many tickets. You will do this many arrests. We've got to keep our friends over at the bail bonds companies profitable. Another story came out of filmingcops.com. It's a YouTube video where the police intentionally caused a traffic jam, just blocked off the lane to catch bikers splitting lanes, riding along the divider, which is a crime. And they just lined up all these bikers, and they wrote them all tickets. We had a similar case here in Hawaii a couple of weeks back where we have the worst traffic in the United States, and that's official from the U.S. Department of Transportation. So down in Waikiki, they were gridlocked. Nobody was moving at all, and people were just sitting there working with their cell phones because they weren't moving, and the cops just walked down the line and wrote a ticket for using a cell phone while driving, even though nobody was actually driving because the traffic was gridlocked. Here in Hawaii, it is a $290 ticket, and they wrote out like $15,000 worth of tickets in the space of 20 minutes. And they know that most of those people are just going to pay the ticket because either they're tourists and they can't stay here to get a court date, or they've got jobs that they don't want to take a day away from their job to go to court, because they could go to court and just simply say, how am I ticketed for using a cell phone while driving if the car was not actually moving? Now, story over here, let's see, this was reported in Courthouse News. Apparently there was a child playing up in a tree. The child has Asperger's syndrome, which means doesn't interact well with people. Medical condition, maybe linked to vaccine use. For some reason, the cops decided that a kid playing in a tree was wrong, and they literally arrived with guns drawn to demand he get out of the tree. After the kid got out of the tree, the cops beat the heck out of him and tasered him, and wound up not arresting him because he hadn't actually committed any kind of a crime. Kid needed medical care, and so there's going to be a lawsuit from that one. It's amazing here. You probably heard this story from Newton, Massachusetts, where there was this cop who, over a 7-month period, kept exposing himself to guys he pulled over. And he took a plea deal, and he's going to resign from the police force, and that was it. That was it for 7 months of wagging his junk at traffic offenders. Just amazing stuff here. All right, the Vatican is getting back into the news. The Pope is coming out with a lot of pronouncements. He's doing a tour around Europe, and they're reviving an old theme here, because I'm looking at this story from westernjournalism.com. Top Vatican advisor Jeffrey Sachs announced that when Pope Francis comes to the United States in September, he will directly challenge the American idea of God-given rights embodied in the Declaration of Independence. And this is not a new idea, because Pope Leo XIII said much the same thing. Details about that when we come back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we went to the commercial, we're talking about how this top Vatican advisor, Jeffrey Sachs, is saying when Pope Francis comes to the United States in September, he is going to challenge this American idea that there are God-given rights as embodied, well, the article says the Declaration of Independence, but it's actually enshrined, if you will, in the Bill of Rights. This is hardly a new position for the Vatican, because Pope Leo XIII, shortly after the U.S. was formed, declared and wrote that the Bill of Rights should never have been created, because God does not give to man freedom of thought, action, and speech. And remember, the word heresy comes from the Greek word heresis, which means free choice, for which the church set a lot of people on fire. And so the Catholic Church's official position is we don't have a right to freedom of speech, we don't have a right to freedom of thought or action, that we must be constrained to do what the Church or Caesar tell us to do, render unto Caesar and all of that. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Al in Canada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for taking the call. I watched the video that was posted on your website with Gilad Atzmon and the rabbi. Wow. I have to wonder if some of these idiots that are controlling these countries, or quote-unquote controlling these countries, watch that, what they would they would think or say. It was amazing, right? I mean, it opened my eyes. And I'm not a religious person, but I've always said for a long time, if I was, I'd probably either be a Hindu or Jewish, because I'm not, one of these, what do they call that, divine conception, or what's that called?
It's
immaculate.
Immaculate conception. Yeah.
Immaculate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not one of these immaculate conception kind of people, so anyway. But it kind of dovetails like with what you were talking about.
What this rabbi in Gilad are doing is they're drawing a line between simply being Jewish and the actions of Israel's government. Now, here in the United States of America, it's an axiom that there is a separation between church and state, which was put in there by the Founding Fathers in order to protect the rights of all religions to be free from persecution and proselytizing and forced conversion and the rest of it. But over in Israel, Israel's government bases a huge amount of their propaganda on Israel being the Jewish state and tries to claim for itself representation for all the world's Jewish people. That, of course, is absolutely ludicrous, especially for Jews who are living outside of Israel. And because of that, Israel actually makes the world a lot more dangerous for Jewish people by basically saying the world's Jewish people are the reason we do what we do, and that sets them all up as potential targets for people who are very angry at what Israel's government is doing. And that's why I keep making this point. We're not talking about Israel's religion, its ethnic background. We're not even talking about all the Israelis. We're talking about a very small group of people who have achieved power in Israel and are behaving badly. They're the issue. It's not anti-Semitism or Jew hate. The issue is the behavior of Israel's government, and no government should be above criticism. That's why we have a First Amendment here in this country. And we're allowed to criticize our government. Why should we not be allowed to criticize a foreign government? And yet, of course, Israel's current agenda is to criminalize anybody for criticizing Israel's government because they're just being anti-Semitic and hateful of the Jews, which is like trying to stifle criticism of the Nazis by saying you're being anti-German and shut up and go away. Sig Heil.
Well, even Eisenhower crossed out Jewish just before state when recognizing Israel.
Truman. That was Truman.
Or I thought that was Eisenhower.
No, that was Truman.
Okay. So, obviously no one really wanted a religious state.
No, generally throughout history, theocracies have been very, very rough on their civil population because governments are supposed to be responsive to their population, but theocracies justify whatever they do because it's the will of the imaginary playmate in the sky, and that is certainly true. Not, we've seen it true of nations under Christian rule, under Muslim rule, under Jewish rule. It is simply an aspect of religious rule, that they're abusive of their people. They don't feel they have to have any regard for them. And again, the Pope is already, supposedly, according to his spokesman, is going to be arguing that the American people don't really have a right to freedom of speech and expression and action and so forth because, God doesn't actually want you to be free. God gave you the brain and hopefully the good sense that you'll never actually use it. Seems to be the dogma that we're getting.
So what's the Pope's answer to the rational people that don't believe in religion?
You're all going to go to heck and you're going to burn. And that's what they've been doing all the time here.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mike.
And by the way, I don't know, thank you for the call. We're going to let you go, Al. I don't know if you've been watching Game of Thrones because the more recent episodes have shown how these religious fanatics have taken over one of the kingdoms. And it's just, the season finale was this last weekend, and it got really intense. All righty, let's see. We're going to grab another phone call here. Bob in Nevada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, about Jade Helm. There's seems to be a forgotten area there, that little strip in Southern California up against the Mexican border nobody talks about.
Okay.
because everybody talks about Texas and Utah being the red zones, but you'll notice there's a strip about 70 miles wide along the Mexican border in Southern California. It occurs to me that the people there should be especially vigilant, because at the extreme southwest corner where California meets the ocean and the Mexican border, right near Tijuana, is the world headquarters of Academy, formerly known as Blackwater.
Yes.
It occurs to me that it would be pretty hard on the people in that area if during Jade Helm there were a contract given to them for private management of what's being done by the military elsewhere. It would be especially bad if that were to happen.
Well, it would be very, very bad. Blackwater Sea Academy, whatever they're calling themselves this week, they have a reputation for vicious brutality in all of the contracts that they accept. That's why they get the money that they get here. But again, we're into Jade Helm, and so far nobody's being rounded up, nobody's being arrested. It does appear to be a training exercise, and apparently they actually had an exercise here in Hawaii that was connected with it, that was a mass casualty simulation, apparently one of the largest in the state's history. So they're out there playing with their toys and everything. It does look like it's a training exercise. Yes, they're training to deal with a civil uprising. But again, I think a major part of Jade Helm, why it stretched over all these states, was to retrain America's army to deal with a frontal assault across large amounts of terrain without getting lost and confused in the process, because they haven't been focusing on that for the last 15 years. They've been focusing on small-scale counterinsurgency operations.
Well, I hope you're right. Take care.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And, I know a lot of people were going overboard about Jade Helm, but right from the start, this idea that this was going to be the martial law takeover of the United States didn't make sense, because they were only doing it in 10 states, then 9, because Arizona backed out. Because if the U.S. government moved to conquer 10 of the United States, the other 40 would start building large walls along their borders. And so it really didn't make much sense. And I do think it is primarily rattling the sabers to show the American people what's going to happen if they riot. But again, I think the other purpose, the reason why the Army is out there in violation of Posse Comitatus, is it's actually a training exercise for a potential push through Ukraine into Russia or some other similar military zone against a peer, because our Army has been training and fighting against nations that can't really fight back effectively, and they're not really prepared to deal with somebody who can actually do the job, and that's a major flaw. And the Pentagon said it 2 weeks ago, and I think that's a big part of what Jade Helm was all about. We got to take another break for our news. We're going to be back with more stories and phone calls. Hopefully you'll all call on in, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Tom is still sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, we're talking about the Pope, who, according to reports from the Vatican, will be here in the United States in September, arguing against this American idea that people have God-given rights to freedom of speech, freedom of action, freedom of thought. And again, we pointed out the history of the church is they actually don't like those things. Pope Leo XIII wrote, the Bill of Rights should never have been created, because God does not allow people to have freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and so forth and so on. Well, the Pope is definitely hopping on board some new major globalist agenda, because he's also signing on to this whole idea of the human-caused global warming. Now, he stopped short of supporting a carbon tax, but the Pope is out there saying that we've all got to do what the government tells us to do to deal with global warming. Now then, a story coming out of the latest research looking at the raw data for climate for the last 10 years. Not adjusted, not projected, not seasonally modified, statistically filtered, or whatever. Looking at the actual available raw data for the last 10 years, there has been no sign of global warming. Quite the contrary, the Earth has entered a cooling phase. coincident with the sun's recent decline in solar output. And it is rather amazing to see how hard that they are still pushing this nonsense, despite all these record-setting cold winters. Record cold temperatures still in Greenland. Remember, almost 20 years ago, the head of Greenpeace said Greenland is going to lose all of its ice in 20 years. And we're down to, I think, maybe 1 or 2 years to the deadline, and Greenland actually has more ice than it had before. All of these dire warnings failed. At the very most generous, we can say they were simply mistaken. And they ought to be man enough to admit that mistake and say, all right, it's not a crisis. We'll go on to something else. Save the spotted owl or something. But they're still pushing this. We know there is a huge financial investment and expected rate of return from carbon credits and carbon taxes. Remember, when Al Gore set up the carbon trading model, he had assistance from Enron's Ken Lay. And if you remember, Enron was the company that cheated the people of California out of $8 billion by manipulating electric supplies. And what Al Gore and Ken Lay planned to do with the entire Earth with carbon dioxide was a copy of what Enron did to California with electricity. It's all a giant scam. But given how hard they are still pushing this, it appears to me that there is some other agenda at work besides the simple profit motive. And it has to do with the United Nations, Agenda 21, and the push for global government. Because the push for global government was basically built, going back to the 1990s when they were starting to talk about this thing, it was built on a foundation of 3 pillars. A global pandemic requiring obedience to a global health authority. They tried to pull that one off in 2009 with the When Pigs Fly flu, which was a complete debacle. The second foundation was humans are warming the earth, therefore we, the United Nations, the global government, have to tell people how to live their lives to save the planet Earth. That clearly is not working. Okay? And the third foundation was a major global economic crash requiring the emergence of a new global private central bank and global financial authority. They seem to be still on track for that one. But you can't build a whole new government with just 1/3 of its original justification. And they may just be propping up this whole human-caused global warming nonsense just so that they can go on saying, this is what we're standing for and this is the good that we're doing here. And they're out there smearing anybody who doubts them as they're climate deniers. That's a word that you hear a lot because it basically is used to map to things like Holocaust deniers and Apollo moon landing deniers. And it's just a propaganda trick to get people to simply say, all right, they're deniers. We don't need to listen to them because they're denying. But the last 10 years of the actual raw, unadjusted climate data, there's no sign of global warming. The world is cooling. The sun is at a 100-year low in total solar output. And it seems to be going into a new Maunder minimum. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, has to do with an astronomer named Maunder who noticed that at this particular time in history, a few hundred years ago, the sun seemed to have no sunspots at all. And it was notable for that. And it coincided with the start of what's called the Little Ice Age, which struck the northern hemisphere. And what's really amazing, I was talking about this article that came out yesterday, trying to smear the climate deniers. And actually in the article saying, they think the sun controls climate on Earth despite copious amounts of evidence to the contrary. There is no evidence that challenges the idea that the sun controls climate on Earth. It doesn't exist. Obviously, the sun dictates our climate. If the sun went away, we would freeze over immediately. If the sun brightened up to twice its brightness, we'd all fry. And solar output does vary. It is not a constant. Never has been. And the sun goes through cycles. We know the 11-year sunspot cycle. the 22-year magnetic cycle. There are indications that there are longer cycles that we don't know because we haven't experienced them. And the cycle that produced the Maunder minimum may be another one, and we're going back into it. Now, with real scientists, I'm going to hit this point again. Real scientists will come up with a theory, a hypothesis, and then they will test it against the real world. If the real world doesn't match the hypothesis, if the hypothesis does not correctly predict what will happen, the hypothesis is scrapped. They go back to the drawing board and they start over. That's science. What we have been seeing with this whole global warming agenda is no matter what happens, we dare not challenge the founding dogma of human-caused global warming. We look for other explanations. Warming is cooling was actually one they tried. The world is getting warmer, but the heat is hiding in the bottom of the ocean, which tells us they don't understand the principles of convection. By the way, back in 2008, ABC News predicted New York City would be underwater by June of 2015 due to human-caused global warming. And they're still out there pushing this as hard as they can. And now they're getting the Pope involved. You know, to get the people who believe rather than think. Oh, if the Pope says it, it must be true. And I think much of the rest of the world is laughing at the United States, at how silly we are at this nonsense of human-caused global warming. I mean, if you read my ClimateGate page, you will see all these quotes by the stars of the global warming movement where they're openly saying, yeah, of course we're lying to you. We need to scare you into going along with what we want to do. That's not science. That's politics. That's agenda. And there's an agenda at work here, or they would have dumped this whole nonsense and said, all right, we're heading into a little ice age. Let's get ready for it. But they're not going to convince you to pay an ice tax, of course. So that's why they have to go on pushing warming and CO2. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And you know what's rather amazing, looking at all these people are out there screaming, you know, human-caused global warming will be the end of us all. Obama actually came out and said global warming is the biggest threat facing the nation. So I guess Al-Qaeda and ISIS are off the hook. And it's rather amazing that you'll see all these people out there screaming about carbon dioxide is bad, and yet you never hear them talking about all this radioactive waste being left all over these battlefields by the United States from the depleted uranium munitions. That stuff has a half-life of 4.5 billion years. It does not go away. And by the way, it also generates heat because of radioactive decay. But carbon dioxide is the villain. GMOs are safe. Vaccines are safe. Carbon dioxide is evil. And no, it isn't, of course. Carbon dioxide is an essential component of the life cycle. If there was no more carbon dioxide, there'd be no more plant life. Nothing for you to eat, except each other. Now, Whole Foods is a large store chain that focuses on healthy, natural, organic eating. And for a while, they were involved in the GMO-free project. We had somebody call into the store the other day, call into the show the other day, who works in the stores, putting up the little flag saying this product is acknowledged and tested to be GMO-free by the GMO project. Well, apparently Whole Foods is having a corporate change of mind, and there was an article over at Natural News. Whole Foods is now changing their rating system for products in the store, and they're just going to be labeled as good, better, best, without any mention about whether they're chemically produced, conventionally produced, organically produced, natural, GMO-free, or not. Whole Foods is saying this is in response to competition from other stores and other markets. I don't think so, because Whole Foods is actually making the same strategic mistake that stores like Radio Shack did. They have a good business with a dedicated niche market, target demographic. And Radio Shack turned its back on the electronic hobbyists who were the mainstay, went high-end, high-style, selling the same toys as everybody else, and they went out of business. I think what may be going on here is that Whole Foods is getting pressure from their non-organic producers to tone down all this labeling stuff, or they simply won't sell to Whole Foods anymore, and Whole Foods will not have product on the shelves. And we've seen that kind of coercive marketing going on. We know that the USDA's certified organic label is not, in fact, 100% organic. It just guarantees a certain percentage of organic. And it's not proof against GMO content. We have this entire agricultural industrial complex that wants to dominate and monopolize food production through patentable seeds. And they want to drive the small organic natural farmers out of business as competition to create a monopoly. They want to do with their GMO seeds what the Federal Reserve almost succeeded in doing with the U.S. Federal Reserve note, create a monopoly and global dependency. And we know that Monsanto is ratcheting up the pressure. Apparently there's a revival of the Monsanto Protective Act, as it were, being attached to a bill in Congress to simply say states cannot pass any laws that identify or limit GMO production. Because if there's a product some large corporation is making that you don't want, by golly, the government will force you to use it. Or at least make sure you can never find out. And that really does hammer home the fact that we're in a fascist economic dictatorship. Because fascism is when corporate profit and power and the government are perfectly in alignment against the general population. And we're seeing all of the ills of fascism in our society. Poor quality products that break down, food that may not be healthy, drugs that may be dangerous, but you're forced by law to go this direction. You're not allowed to grow your own medication in the backyard. You're not allowed to make your own medication. You're not allowed to treat yourself. You will be plugged into the system. You will be dependent. I'm going to be hitting that word really hard these next couple of weeks as we come up on Independence Day. And I would like everybody here to take a moment to read the Declaration of Independence. The original, not the Common Core version. And remember what it was the British government did, what the Crown did, that drove Americans to that point of saying, we got to kick these guys out. And a lot of it had to do with enforced dependence. King George III outlawed the currency being produced by the colonies, said you will conduct all commerce using banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. You will be dependent on the Bank of England's interest-bearing currency. You will be dependent on the British East India Company for tea and various other products. You will be dependent on British knitting mills for your fabric. Because that enforced dependency is slavery. It's how Britain controlled its empire. Everywhere Britain went into, United States, Australia, India, everywhere, the first thing they did was say, you will be dependent on British industry and banking. You're not allowed to go anywhere else at all. And we're back in that same situation. So I hope you'll read the Declaration of Independence. I'm not just saying that because one of my ancestors signed it. But I think if you read it objectively, going through it, you will see a lot of similarities between what the British Crown was doing to the American colonies back then and what our government is doing to us now. And one of the reasons so many of those amendments are in the Bill of Rights were in direct response to the abuses of the British government, including the quartering of troops in households to make sure they weren't saying or doing anything bad, searches without warrants just because. Now, they don't need to quarter soldiers in our homes anymore because they've got the NSA spyware inside our telephones, inside our computers, inside our tablets. We're back in the same state as the American colonials, a government that dominates us, profits from us, does not trust us, wants to take away our guns. It's like all the social progress of the last 2.5 centuries. Just thrown out the window. Okay. Now, we're coming up on another commercial break here. When we come back, some medical stories. Hopefully, we'll get some phone calls in before the end of the show. Apparently, Ebola is coming back. MERS is spreading. We're already starting to see the effects in supermarkets of the bird flu pandemic. Shortages of chicken and eggs. They're starting to ration eggs in some part of the country. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Ebola has not quite gone away. Both Sierra Leone and Guinea are seeing an increase in Ebola cases. It's not a huge number, but it is significant in that it was thought the illness was under control in both those countries. 16 new cases in Guinea, 15 more in Sierra Leone. Now, already the various organizations who are at the forefront of dealing with Ebola are saying that they are no better prepared today than they were when this Ebola outbreak first began. Around that clinic at Kenema, where they were testing this vaccine. Now, interestingly enough, over in China, they've developed a new Ebola drug. And apparently there was a big stink because this nurse who got Ebola in Sierra Leone was sent to a hospital in Rome. And she was given this medication, MIL-77. It's a product from China. And apparently it worked very, very well. Now, it is close to the drug ZMapp, which was created by a collaboration between the United States and Canada. And the U.S. and Canada are screaming that China is stealing their technology. Well, the problem is that ZMapp is very difficult to manufacture, and they had run out. And China just made this medication, the MIL-77, available to this nurse in Rome and also a British Army nurse in London. And that's one thing China is able to do that the U.S. and Canada can't anymore, and that's get a product out the door very, very quickly. And it sort of underscores that what is behind all these treatments and everything is the desire to make money. Because you would think if you're dealing with something like Ebola, which is potentially very serious if it breaks out, that you will use whatever is going to work. And we're seeing this fight going on between the makers of ZMapp and MIL-77 saying, no, you can't use your medicine, you have to use my medicine. Even though we're out of it, just wait and we'll get it to you. Because they're fighting over profit share. It's a big, big business here. Which leads us to this article that we saw over in Sputnik News. Skyrocketing drug prices leave sick U.S. patients without medicine. Last year, prescription drugs in the United States pulled in $374 billion, up 13% from the year before. Huge amounts of money, out of which, yes, they'll gladly pay a few $1 million in a settlement to the people who are killed or permanently harmed by the drugs. But it's just driven by all of this huge profit. And, of course, they have the money necessary to go to Washington, D.C. and get all this lobbying to say, oh, you've got to indemnify the vaccine makers. And, you've got to silence people who say that this drug may be linked to cancer. It's not a system that we can trust with our health because health is not what drives the system. Money does. Apparently MERS has spread to Europe. They've had a patient die of that in Germany. Now, over in California, as you know, the stink is continuing over Senate Bill 277, the one that would remove all exemptions from school children vaccinations other than a note from a doctor saying this vaccine will cause this patient harm. And I am sure we're going to start seeing brand new medical students set up practices where that's all they do. Just like they've had a rash of medical students who are doctors, they're fully doctors, and they set up a shop, and all they do is they write prescriptions for medical marijuana. That's all they do. But apparently, the Republican Party of Orange County voted to approve a resolution opposing this bill on the vaccination of children. And apparently, they're seeing a rash of Democrats re-registering as Republicans as part of their opposition to this draconian mandatory vaccination bill. And again, if vaccines were known to be safe and healthy, it wouldn't be an issue. The problem is people resent being forced to inject their children with something that is demonstrably harmful to a significant percentage of the people it's given to. Now, over in Scotland, they're going to issue a vaccine ID card to monitor parents who refuse vaccinations. In other words, your name goes on the list, and they're going to be looking for you. They're trying to find evidence to say, see, it's the unvaccinated children who are causing the problem. And no, it isn't. Even the CDC acknowledges that when a child gets a vaccine for measles and mumps, he can give those diseases to other children around him. These vaccines are causing more illness than they cure. The Vaccine Settlement Court acknowledges over 100 deaths from the measles vaccine this last year. The CDC reports nobody has died of measles itself in the last 10 years in the United States. We're back in 1976 with the swine flu vaccine, where the vaccine is killing more people than the illness is. But it makes money, so we're going to go on doing it here. Now, Hillary Clinton is out on the campaign trail, and among her many proposals she's floating is mandatory preschool for all American children. That as president, she will make preschools in every neighborhood. They'll be affordable for all Americans, and all parents will be required to send their kids to preschool, as if getting them at kindergarten wasn't early enough to start infusing them with Common Core. Now they want them at preschool. We're slowly evolving towards a social structure where the parents are completely disconnected from their own children once they pop the little baby out. The baby is born, thank you very much, we'll take over from here. Turn him into something useful to the state. For you geologists and volcanologists, there's a lot going on the planet right now. We've got the Samura volcanoes going, Bulusan, Mount Asama in Japan, just northwest of Tokyo, erupted earlier today, and of course Mount Sinabung is really starting to shake, rattle, and roll down there in Indonesia. They're expecting that the number of people evacuated from around that mountain will soon reach 4,000. They've got about 2,500 out now. They're sending out evacuation orders for other people. There's a huge lava dome building in the crater, which portends a possible mass release of lava. Pyroclastic flows are happening all the time, and of course those can kill you very, very quickly as well. And the concern about Mount Sinabung, of course, is that it is a possible vent to the magma chamber for the Toba supervolcano, which, if that were to come to life, and again there were sporadic but unconfirmed reports of steam and hydrogen sulfide gas coming out of the ground around the shores of Lake Toba, which is the remains of the caldera. So have to keep an eye on that one. If that thing were to pop loose, I think we can forget about all this talk about vaccines and GMO and global warming, because we would have much, much larger problems to solve here. Now, here is an interesting story, and normally I don't go with this sort of thing, but it just piqued my curiosity. Apparently, researchers excavating the Denisova Cave in Siberia located a cache of ancient objects, including jewelry, very nicely made. And after years of testing, they discovered it in 2008, after years of testing have confirmed these items, this bracelet, were made 40,000 years ago. And they think the people who made it were a slightly different and now extinct intelligent human species. We like to pretend that we've learned most of what there is to know about science and history, but in truth we hold a single candle of what we do know against a vast darkness of that which we do not. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today. We've got a few things to cover here. And I think I mentioned this yesterday, but I want to go back to it. Over in Great Britain, there's a software company that is now selling special software to the British schools that will monitor their children to see if they are potential terrorists, based on simply scanning URLs they visit and certain key phrases that might be construed as terrorism. And if you look at the list of DHS-monitored words that we use for our website as part of the Daily Banner. They're words that can come up in very innocent conversation, but they're going to stigmatize these kids. And by the way, the British schools do not have a huge amount of money with which to teach the children. So they're taking away from some other educational program to basically put in this spy system to watch the kids to make sure they're not being drawn into terrorism. And by the way, nobody is drawn into terrorism. They're driven. Now, up in New York, there's a very interesting case. There's a prosecutor has charged a West Point cadet for collecting and trading photos and videos of young boys being forced into sexual acts. I don't know, maybe he's aiming for a political career. I don't know. But it occurs to me, in an honest world where you had available data, not the NSA stuff where they keep it all themselves, I think it's time that we start looking at these people who are into sexual stimulation from very young children and see what psychiatric medications they're on. We know that SSRIs, antidepressants, can trigger senseless violence and suicide. We shouldn't assume that's the only symptom that is coming out of these brain-altering medications. And I think it would be a worthwhile experiment to do a survey and see if there's a correlation between this predatory behavior against children and a specific medication or class of medications that these people are on. Because if you look at how much prescription medication is being sold in this country, $370 billion a year, the vast majority of Americans are on some kind of pill or other, and as the behavior of the population gets more and more bizarre, I think it's time that we have to ask the question, have we actually drugged our own nation into psychotic breaks? I think we need to look at that. Over at the CIA, as you're probably aware, when they claimed they got Osama bin Laden at Abbottabad, which was a propaganda hoax. The real bin Laden died in December of 2001 of Marfan syndrome. And they took whoever it was they killed in Abbottabad, dumped him in the ocean, and they tried to demonize him by saying, well, he was living in that and he had a porn collection, which tells us he isn't really Muslim, whoever was in that house, because in Islam, looking at a naked woman, not your wife, is a mortal sin. So if this guy is watching porn, then he's not really Muslim, which lets all the other Muslims in the world off the hook for all these acts of terror attributed to these people. Now, somebody filed a Freedom of Information Act for bin Laden's porn collection, and the CIA is refusing it. And we're not sure why. They certainly are not protecting the privacy of whoever it was they killed in Abbottabad. Maybe the CIA is still whacking off to it, but they could always make copies. But it may be there wasn't really a porn collection there. It was just another one of the lies told to make you think, oh, he's a bad guy. And at the same time, they undermine the idea that he was some kind of a devout fanatic Muslim. Just like the people who were accused of 9/11. You know, they're fanatical Muslims, and that's why they're carrying out these strikes, except that these Muslims were drinking, hanging out with strippers, doing drugs. Anyway. Let's see. Let's grab a few stories from the members page here. Russia's gold reserves are a growing threat to the U.S. dollar, which we know. Apparently, Donald Trump's announcement that he is running for president has prompted a flurry of Twitter posts basically making fun of him, saying, I demand to see Donald Trump's hair's birth certificate. That's actually kind of funny. And somebody said, to summarize Donald Trump presidential announcement, he's really rich, politicians are stupid. Back to you in the studio. Now, speaking of Twitter, Netanyahu is using his Twitter account to basically spam out to everybody that they need to get the facts on Gaza, which includes a link to Israel's report that they're trying to get out there ahead of the United Nations report. And it does seem that they're getting desperate. Now, there is some bad news for those of us who run blogs and the independent media. Apparently, there is a move in the European Union to charge websites a link tax, where if your website links to somebody else's source for information, that you will be taxed for that. Obviously, for news aggregator sites like mine, that would be a major blow. There's a campaign underway in the European Union to basically try and counter that. We'll see where that goes. And apparently there's another court decision in Europe. The Human Rights Court has declared that websites are now liable for user comments. So if there's a website that somebody in Israel doesn't like, they can log in, post a vile anti-Semitic comment, and get the owner of the website sued. Which, by the way, has happened before. A lot of the really rabid Jew-hating posts that do show up from time to time are actually put there by Israel in an effort to get the entire website shut down. It's just one of their many tactics. But this idea that we have to police the user comments, I mean, obviously if something like that passed here, I'd just shut off the user comments. Or I would curtail them at the very, very least here. FBI continues to say they hate encryption, but they're encrypting all visits to their website. And by the way, Reddit co-founder Aaron Swartz, we've got an interview by him posted to the website. Months before we were told it was a suicide, he warned that corporations were working to find ways to control the Internet. We certainly know that's true from Monsanto. They're trying to shut down any websites critical of GMO or Roundup or glyphosate. We know that's certainly true of the vaccine makers. They're trying to find ways that they can legally shut down websites that have information that their products are not really very good, because that's apparently a lot easier to do than actually make a good product. Now, if we had a central federal government that was really doing an honest job, they would set up the laws to make it easier for companies to make good products than to silence criticism. But we fell away from that kind of honest central government a long, long time ago here. Let's see. Privacy advocates walk out in protest over U.S. facial recognition code of conduct. Part of the problem here, and we're seeing this out of Ars Technica, retailers want legal authority to scan your face without your permission when you go in and out of stores. Remember the movie Minority Report? You'd walk into the store and the computer voice would say, "Hi, Mr. Chang, how did that jacket you bought work out?" They're really trying to bring that in. And boy, I can't think of anything more annoying than going into a store and having salespeople hover all around me. And it's going to be worse with these disembodied voices from the ceiling saying, Mike, did you enjoy the jelly donuts last time? Especially if I'm with my wife who doesn't know that I'm eating jelly donuts. So we're unfortunately getting into that dystopian society so many movies warned us about. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. I am working on the new version of the What Really Happened website. It's coming along. I'm looking to launch it over the July 4th weekend. It's been hard work, very expensive. Donations are welcome. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.